My name is Emma Whitmore. I am 32 years old, a high school teacher in Charleston, and I thought family betrayal meant cold shoulders at Thanksgiving or quiet gossip behind my back. I never imagined it would begin with a wedding invitation that left me off the guest list. At first, I told myself it was a mistake until I saw the way my parents smiled at my younger sister Lydia, the way they spoke as if I did not belong. Then small cracks began to show. A credit report with debts. I never signed an account with my name, and her handwriting late-night threats that reached my phone and the sound of my own brakes giving out on a quiet road. I kept asking myself one question. How far would my own sister go to erase me? And when the answer finally came, it did not arrive in whispers or rumors. It arrived in a way no one in my family could escape, not even Lydia herself. Stay with me, because this is the story of how humiliation turned into something far darker and how I learned that silence can be broken in the most public way imaginable. But to understand how it all unfolded, you need to know how it began. I was 32 years old teaching American literature at a public high school in Charleston, South Carolina, when my sister's engagement news reached me. Lydia was 28, beautiful in a polished kind of way, and had always known how to draw attention. For as long as I could remember, she and I had lived in a quiet but sharp competition. She won favors at school, charmed relatives at holidays, and somehow always managed to get our mother's hand resting on her shoulder while I was left, proving myself in silence. That afternoon, I came home from work with a pile of essays to grade and found my mother at the kitchen table holding a glossy envelope. Her face was glowing with pride. She told me Lydia was marrying Ethan Whitford, only son of the Whitford family that owned one of the largest hotel groups in the Southeast. She spoke of it as if it were royalty, as if Lydia had secured not just a husband but an entire empire. I felt a strange mix of surprise and resignation. Lydia had always had expensive taste. To her, love had to come wrapped in opportunity. Still, a part of me thought perhaps marriage would mellow her, bring her down to earth. That night after dinner, I opened the envelope that had been set aside for me. Inside was the wedding invitation, cream-colored with gold lettering, the kind of card that felt heavy in the hand. I traced my eyes across the elegant script, reading the date, the venue, the names of prominent guests. I read it twice, then a third time. My name was not listed anywhere. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my name had been overlooked on the outer card but would appear on the seating chart. I flipped through again, pressing my fingers against the stiff paper, searching for proof I was wanted there. Nothing. I felt my chest tighten as if the air had thinned. I carried the card to my mother, who was rinsing dishes in the sink. I placed it on the counter in front of her. My voice trembled, though I tried to sound even. I asked if there had been a mistake, if perhaps my invitation had been mixed up. She glanced at the card, then at me, her eyes shifting uncomfortably. She kept drying her hands with the towel longer than necessary before speaking. Finally, she said it would be better for everyone if I did not attend. The words hung between us, cruel in their simplicity. Better for whom? Better how? I tried to ask again, but she shook her head firmly as if closing a door. I walked to my room with my heartbeat roaring in my ears. On the desk sat a photograph of Lydia and me at a 4th of July barbecue years ago, both of us holding sparklers, both smiling. I remembered how that night she had whispered that my sparkler burned out faster than hers, and our mother had laughed at the joke while I pretended not to care. Memories began flooding back. When I was in high school and competed for a scholarship, Lydia told everyone I had copied an essay. It was untrue, but the rumor spread and I lost the committee's trust. Mother said Lydia was young and did not mean harm, but the damage was mine to carry. Later, when I graduated college and moved back home to save money while teaching, Lydia mocked me for still living in the same town. Mother called it sibling teasing, nothing more. Now, staring at the invitation that excluded me, I realized the pattern had never broken. Lydia reached for the spotlight, and I was pushed further into the shadows, and Mother always found a way to justify it. I lay awake that night, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, the weight of humiliation pressing into me. To be barred from my own sister's wedding, the event that was meant to unite families, felt like being erased from my own bloodline. I thought of the guests gathering, of my absence being explained away with some convenient lie. Tears came hot and angry, not just from being left out but from the years of being silenced, overlooked, set aside. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth so no sound would escape. And yet, under that grief, something steadier stirred. A quiet determination, hard and unyielding. I told myself I would not beg for entry where I was not wanted. But I also would not let them trample me again. I would hold my silence for now, let them believe I was defeated. Inwardly, I began to shape a promise. I would not scream, I would not plead. I would wait, I would watch, and when the time came, I would remind them that leaving me out had consequences. For the first time in years, instead of feeling powerless, I felt a seed of power growing in the silence. And I knew deep down this wedding, the one they thought would be perfect without me, might one day become the moment they most regretted. I folded the invitation back into its envelope, set it inside the drawer of my desk, and turned off the light. I could not sleep, but I did not cry again. I just lay in the dark, listening to the steady thud of my own heart, already imagining how to take back what had been denied. The next evening we gathered at the dining table, a routine family dinner that should have felt ordinary but did not. My mother had set the table with her best china, something she usually reserved for holidays. The roast chicken filled the room with a smell that should have been comforting. Instead, it made me restless. Lydia sat at the head of the table as if she already owned the place, her engagement ring sparkling under the chandelier. Father leaned in to listen to her every word, nodding along while Mother laughed at every small comment. I pushed peas around my plate, trying to act as though I belonged there, though the silence pressing down on me said otherwise. Lydia described the floral arrangements in detail, the tall white roses, the imported orchids, how she and Ethan had spent an afternoon choosing every centerpiece. My mother clasped her hands together, sighing with delight. Father added that guests would be impressed by the venue, the Whitford estate overlooking the river, a place more often seen in magazines than in real life. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to ask why my name had been missing from the invitation. For a moment, the clinking of silverware stopped. Lydia turned her head slowly, her eyes sharp, her lips curving into a smile that carried no warmth. She said the wedding was not meant for people who only dragged others down. The words struck harder than I expected, cutting through the last layer of hope I had clung to. Mother shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Father sliced his chicken as though the conversation did not involve him. I felt the room tilt, the voices dulling as if I were sinking beneath water. I wanted to scream that I had never dragged anyone down, that all I had ever done was try to exist beside them, but the words lodged in my throat. I swallowed hard and let the silence settle. My fingers gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Inside, I could feel something hardening the way a scar stiffens over a wound. As the conversation moved on without me, I drifted into memory. I was 17 again, standing outside the principal's office. A scholarship was within my reach, one I had worked for all year. But then whispers began to spread that I had tampered with another student's test, that I had sabotaged it so my own grade would shine brighter. I remembered Lydia's face when I confronted her, how she shrugged and said, maybe people just believed what they wanted to believe. I had no proof. The committee withdrew my application and the scholarship went to someone else. When I came home crying, Mother said Lydia had only been joking around and that people misunderstood her. Father told me to work harder next time. The sting of that moment returned, now sitting at the dinner table years later, realizing that the same dynamic had never left. Lydia accused I suffered, and my parents pretended neutrality while leaning toward her side. I glanced at her, now laughing, as she spoke about the champagne she had chosen, about how Ethan's family insisted on a vintage from California that cost more per bottle than my monthly rent. She looked radiant, triumphant, untouchable. I realized she was not just excluding me. She was erasing me the same way she had once erased my chance at a scholarship, my credibility, my standing in this family. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. Mother noticed but chose to compliment Lydia's earrings instead. I sat in silence, listening to their voices echo around me, each word hammering the reality deeper. Somewhere between the laughter and the clinking glasses, I understood that my place in this family had never been secure. It was conditional, always dependent on Lydia's shadow. If she smiled, I might be tolerated. If she turned, I would be cast aside. The realization did not bring tears this time. It brought clarity. They wanted me outside the circle, watching from a distance, voiceless, but I knew now I had been given a gift hidden in cruelty. Distance meant freedom to act. Silence meant space to plan. I lifted my water glass and took a long sip, my eyes fixed on the flicker of candlelight in front of me. On the surface, I appeared calm, the obedient daughter letting the conversation pass her by. Inside, I was piecing together years of betrayals, connecting each thread of favoritism, each lie, each dismissal. It all pointed in one direction, and it no longer frightened me. The rest of the meal passed, with Lydia's laughter filling the air, while I remained the quiet ghost at the table. By the time dessert was served, a dense chocolate cake that usually would have tempted me, I felt only the bitterness of exclusion sitting on my tongue. When the plates were cleared and Mother began collecting cups, I excused myself, standing up with steady legs. No one tried to stop me. Lydia did not even glance my way. I walked upstairs to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, listening to the muffled voices below. It was in that stillness that the weight of the past and present fused into one. This was not just about a wedding. It was about a lifetime of being measured against Lydia and found lacking. They had made their choice clear. Now it was my turn to make mine. I sat at my desk, staring at the closed drawer where the invitation lay hidden. The house around me carried on with laughter and clatter, but in that room I could feel a different current building, quiet and certain. The wound they opened tonight would not close with time. It would only sharpen my resolve. I switched off the lamp, letting the room fall into darkness, and lay back on my bed. My eyes traced the faint glow of the ceiling as I exhaled slowly. The night was quiet except for the faint echo of voices downstairs, voices that no longer claimed me. A few mornings later, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, the quiet hum of my apartment building surrounding me. I had the habit of checking my credit report every few months, a ritual I picked up after watching too many stories of people ruined by fraud. It always gave me a small sense of control, a reassurance that at least in that corner of my life I knew where I stood. The report opened on my laptop screen, rows of familiar entries scrolling past. My old student loan nearly paid off. My credit card balances modest and predictable. Then a line appeared that made me blink twice. A personal loan, $5,000, opened just 6 months ago. The lender was a bank downtown that I had never dealt with. I leaned closer, my heart beating faster. My name was listed, my address correct, my social security number the same as mine. The payments were marked as current, a few installments already made. But I had never applied for this. I had never signed anything. My fingers grew clammy against the keyboard as I dialed the customer service number. A cheerful voice answered, asked for my information, and then pulled up the account. The representative confirmed the details, including the loan application. She said they had a photocopy of my driver's license and a signed agreement on file. I almost dropped the phone. I asked her to send me copies. She agreed, promising to email scanned images within the hour. I hung up, staring at the blank wall across from me. My own identity stared back at me from somewhere I had never been. When the email came, I opened the files with a kind of dread. There it was, a grainy photocopy of my license, the photo slightly blurred but unmistakably me. The signature looked similar to mine, but not exact, like someone had practiced it until it passed casual inspection. The application form carried all my correct details except one. The contact number listed was not mine. I printed the pages, my hands trembling as I stacked them neatly. That number looked familiar. It nagged at me, pulling at some corner of memory. I fetched an old box from my closet, a shoebox filled with years of scraps and notes, things I never threw away. At the bottom was a torn envelope with Lydia's handwriting from years ago, back when she moved apartments and scribbled her new cell number for me. I held the two numbers side by side, whispering them aloud. They matched except for the last digit, which had since changed. My throat tightened. The room seemed to shrink around me. For a few moments, I tried to convince myself it had to be coincidence. Maybe someone else once had that number. Maybe I was being paranoid, reading patterns where there were none. But deep down, I knew better. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though the taste was bitter and metallic. My thoughts churned. If Lydia had done this, it was not just a prank or a petty slight. It was fraud, a deliberate act using my name, my information. It was a crime that could ruin me if left unchecked. The urge to call her boiled inside me, but I resisted. If she had gone far enough to steal my identity, then confronting her without proof would only push her to cover her tracks. I needed to think, to be careful, to understand how deep this went. I sat back down and dialed the bank again, this time asking about the payment method. The representative hesitated, but eventually confirmed that the payments came from an account under a different name, though tied to the same phone number listed on the loan. She could not give me the exact account holder due to privacy, but she confirmed it was not mine. That was enough to make my stomach twist. Someone had used me as a mask, borrowing money while making payments, just enough to avoid suspicion. It explained why I had not been called or chased for collections. The account was active, alive, hidden in plain sight. I closed my laptop and spread the printed pages across the table. My own face stared at me from the license copy. My fake signature sat next to it. And beneath it all, the ghost of Lydia's number gleamed like a trap I had only just discovered. The walls of the apartment seemed too thin for secrets that heavy. I rose, pacing from one end of the room to the other. My pulse thudded in my ears. I thought of every conversation with Lydia, every smirk, every time she dismissed me. Her words at dinner echoed again. This wedding was not for people who dragged others down. Yet here she was dragging me into something that could land me in a courtroom. I pressed my palms against the counter and forced myself to breathe. I told myself not to panic. There were steps I could take. I would file a report. I would freeze my credit. I would protect myself quietly. But beyond those steps, another thought pressed harder. If Lydia was willing to risk this much, what else was she hiding? The question burned inside me, spreading like fire in dry grass. I knew this was more than a single loan. It was a thread that, once pulled, might unravel far more than Lydia intended anyone to see. I gathered the papers into a folder, sliding them inside as carefully as if they were evidence for a trial. The sound of the drawer closing echoed in the silence. For the first time, I felt the faint outline of a plan forming, one that went beyond defending myself. The night outside deepened, shadows slipping across my apartment floor. I stood by the window, staring at the streetlights blinking against the dark. Somewhere across town, Lydia was planning a wedding filled with roses and chandeliers, imagining herself untouchable. She had no idea I now held the first proof that could shatter it all. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the glass. The folder lay on my desk, weighting the weight of it undeniable. I sat down, rested my hands on its surface, and closed my eyes. My heart no longer raced with fear alone. It carried something steadier, something colder, the beginning of resolve. The next morning, I called Sarah, an old friend from college who now worked in compliance at a regional bank. She had always been steady and precise, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. I hesitated before dialing, but once she answered, I could not stop myself from blurting everything. I told her about the strange loan, the photocopy of my license, the forged signature, and the phone number that pointed to Lydia. I could hear the disbelief in her silence, followed by the careful tone she used whenever she weighed her words. She told me to send over the documents and promised she would check what she could unofficially. I scanned everything and emailed her. The hours that followed stretched thin, each tick of the clock scraping against my nerves. I tried to distract myself with chores, folding, laundry, scrubbing counters, anything that kept my hands moving. But every time I stopped, my eyes wandered to the folder on my desk. That evening, Sarah called back. Her voice was low, as if she had closed the office door behind her. She told me she had searched the internal databases, and what she found went far beyond a single small loan. My name appeared on a much larger credit file tied to a commercial loan application for $350,000. The air drained from my lungs. My knees gave out, and I sat heavily on the couch, clutching the phone so hard it hurt. Sarah explained that the loan had been approved nearly a year ago, with collateral listed under my name. The repayment schedule was already showing delays. If the payments defaulted, collections would come after me. I whispered that I had never seen or signed such papers. She said the documents on file had the same photocopied license, the same forged signature, only on a larger scale. She also mentioned the email address tied to the application. It looked like mine, but was not exact. A single letter had been switched. She read it to me, and recognition slammed through me. It was the email Lydia once used when she applied for an internship years ago, a variation she made because her usual address was taken. I had seen it on her laptop back then, the odd misspelling that she claimed nobody else would notice. My stomach twisted as if the room itself tilted sideways. Sarah paused, asking softly if I was safe, if I had reason to believe a family member was behind it. I could not answer. My throat locked. I only thanked her and promised I would take it from here. After we hung up, I sat in the dim light, my hands trembling against my knees. Betrayal had a weight that pressed into every bone. This was not just a small fraud to cover some careless spending. This was calculated enormous, a crime designed to bury me under debt while shielding the real culprits. I spread the new documents Sarah had forwarded to me across the table. Payment schedules, loan approvals, authorization stamps. Each page carried my name like a weapon turned against me. I traced the forged signature with my fingertip and felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Slowly, the pieces aligned. Lydia had excluded me from her wedding not to humiliate me, though that was part of it. She needed me far away, silent, absent, while she and Ethan tied themselves to the Whitford family empire. The fewer eyes on her, the safer her secret remained. Inviting me risked too much. One slip, one conversation, and someone might discover the loans she had built in my name. The realization cut sharper than any insult she had ever thrown. I was not just unwanted. I was inconvenient, a liability to be erased from the family portrait. I pulled out old emails, cross-checking dates. Around the same time the large loan had been processed, Lydia had been traveling with Ethan, meeting investors, posing for photos at hotel openings. Her life looked glittering on the surface, but now I saw the scaffolding beneath it was rotting. Their luxury came built on the foundation of my stolen identity. My body shook with anger. I wanted to scream, to storm into my parents' house and throw the papers on the table. But I knew how that would go. They would shield her, dismiss me, accuse me of jealousy. They had done it before. This time I needed more than outrage. I needed proof that no one could deny. I gathered the documents into the folder again, pressing down until the cardboard bent under my palm. For a long moment, I simply breathed, the sound of my own pulse filling the silence. Somewhere in that stillness, a new clarity formed. I understood now why the invitation had never arrived in my name. I understood why my mother's eyes avoided mine when I asked. It had never been about sparing me embarrassment. It was about removing a witness. The knowledge was bitter, but it also steadied me. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. The truth was real, and it was sitting in my hands. The night outside had grown heavy, the streetlights glowing faintly through the blinds. I pushed the folder to the center of the table, sat back in my chair, and stared at it. My reflection wavered in the glass of the window across the room. It was not just fear that held me anymore. It was resolve hardening into something sharper. Lydia and Ethan thought they had hidden their tracks, that they had written me out of their story. But they had underestimated me. I reached for a pen and notepad, began writing down names, dates, numbers, every link I could see. The list grew longer, the connections clearer, until the outline of their scheme stretched across the page. When I finally set the pen down, my hand ached and my eyes burned. But I felt steadier, almost calm. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had given me the one thing they feared most: a reason to fight back. The next few days, I noticed the same black SUV parked across from my house, always at odd hours, engine off, windows dark. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, maybe a neighbor's visitor or someone lost in the neighborhood. But after the third night in a row, when I came home from the grocery store and saw it sitting there again, headlights flashing once as I turned into my driveway, the chill in my stomach told me it was no mistake. I locked the door behind me, checked every window twice, and sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out in front of me. My phone buzzed against the wood. An unknown number. I hesitated before opening the message. Only 5 words appeared on the screen. Do not get involved or regret. I stared until the letters blurred. My fingers trembled as I set the phone down. Whoever had sent it knew. They were warning me or threatening me. Either way, it was proof that I had stepped onto ground they did not want me standing on. The next morning, I forced myself to go to work as usual. The hallways of the high school buzzed with the noise of teenagers, lockers, slamming, voices rising in waves. For a few hours, I let the rhythm of teaching steady me. Equations on the board, questions from the back row, the familiar weight of chalk in my hand. But underneath, my nerves stayed coiled tight. That afternoon, driving home along the 2-lane road that cut through the marsh, I pressed the brake as I approached a stop sign. Nothing happened. The pedal sank to the floor with no resistance. My heart leapt into my throat. The car surged forward, and I yanked the wheel to the right, swerving onto the shoulder. Gravel sprayed as the car skidded to a halt inches from a ditch. I sat gripping the steering wheel, gasping, unable to move. Cars honked as they passed, but all I could hear was the pounding of blood in my ears. When I finally stepped out, my legs shook so badly I had to lean against the hood. I called a tow truck and rode in silence as they hauled my car to the nearest garage. The mechanic, a gray-haired man with oil-stained hands, slid under the car while I waited with my arms wrapped around myself. Minutes later, he wheeled out, wiping his palms on a rag. He looked at me strangely, as if weighing whether to speak. "The brake line has been cut," he said at last. "Not worn out. Not damaged by accident. Cut clean, like with a blade." The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught sharp and painful as the truth settled in. Someone had tried to kill me. I asked if he was sure. He nodded slowly, eyes steady on mine, then suggested I call the police. I shook my head before I could stop myself. I pictured the officers arriving, my parents hearing about it, Lydia tilting her head with practiced innocence. She would spin it, make me look paranoid again. I thanked him, paid for the replacement part, and told him I would take it from here. That night, I could not eat. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the street. Every passing car made my chest tighten. When the black SUV rolled by again, slower than the rest, I gripped the arm of the couch so hard the fabric bunched under my nails. Fear had wrapped itself around me completely. But under the fear, another feeling burned. If I stayed quiet, if I did nothing, they would erase me permanently. Either I would die in a ditch or live the rest of my life buried under debts that were never mine. I walked into my bedroom, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder again. I spread the papers across the bed, arranging them into neat rows. Loan applications, forged signatures, email trails, timelines. The pattern was undeniable. They had used me as their scapegoat, and now they wanted me gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body trembling but my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. This was no longer about hurt feelings or a missed wedding invitation. It was survival. Lydia and Ethan thought they had me cornered. They thought fear would keep me silent, but they had underestimated me again. I picked up a pen and wrote in my notebook, underlining the words twice. Document everything. Keep copies outside the house. Trust no one. When I closed the notebook, I felt the faintest shift inside me. The fear was still there, heavy and cold, but it no longer owned me. They had shown me what they were capable of. Now it was my turn to show them what I was capable of too. I got up, carried the papers back to the desk, and began scanning each one into my computer. The hum of the scanner filled the room, steady and precise. Page by page, I built a record no one could destroy. By the time the last sheet slid into the tray, the clock on the wall read past midnight. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but steady. My car had almost been the end of me, but it had not been. They had tried once. They would try again. And the next time I would be ready. The morning after the brakes failed, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold and stared at the phone in my hand. My contacts blurred in front of me until one name came into focus. Daniel Hayes. We had gone to high school together. Back then, he was sharp, a little stubborn, always the one who challenged teachers and defended the kids everyone else ignored. Last I heard, he was practicing law in Colombia. My thumb hovered over the call button until I pressed it before I could change my mind. He answered on the second ring. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but carried the same steady edge. Emma, it has been years. What's going on? I told him I needed help. Not over the phone. He did not press for details. Just asked me to come by his office that afternoon. The drive there felt longer than it should. My hands gripped the wheel tighter with every mile. When I walked into his office, Daniel stood from behind a desk covered in case files. He looked older, lines around his eyes, but his smile was familiar. After the small talk faded, I laid the folder in front of him. He read silently for a long time. The only sound was the turn of pages. When he finally looked up, his face was sober. This is serious, Emma. You could be held liable if they keep pushing these loans in your name. But you also have leverage more than you realize. I asked what I should do. First, protect yourself, he said. Keep everything backed up. Make copies. Store them outside your house. Second, start gathering more. Conversations, documents, anything that ties them directly to this. But it has to be done legally. If you want this to stand in court, we have to do it by the book. I nodded, my throat tight. He leaned forward, his voice lower. They want you to feel isolated. That is how they control people. You are not alone now. The words hit harder than I expected. I felt something crack inside, a release of the weight I had been carrying alone. Daniel walked me through options. Recording calls, installing discrete cameras in my car and home office, securing cloud storage. He even handed me a small recorder he used for depositions. Keep it on you, he said. People talk more than they realize. We also discussed strategy. If Lydia and Ethan believed they had broken me, they would get careless. Pretend to stay quiet, he said. Pretend to be afraid. Let them think they won. That is when they will slip. I drove home with the recorder in my purse, my shoulders straighter than they had been in weeks. That evening, I sat on my bed and tested it, whispering a few words and replaying them. The sound was clear, crisp. I tucked it under my pillow, ready. 2 days later, Lydia called. Her voice came through sharp and sweet, the tone she used when she wanted to remind me I was beneath her. She asked how I was doing, whether I had been keeping busy at school, whether I had thought more about skipping the wedding festivities altogether. I answered, carefully, soft, measured, as if I were worn down. Then her tone shifted, colder, heavier. If you breathe a word about those papers, Emma, if you even think about running your mouth, you will spend the rest of your life paying off debts you never imagined. She let the words hang before she laughed, lightly covering them as if it were all a joke. I held the phone steady against my ear, forcing my voice not to break. I told her I understood. Then I ended the call. My hands shook as I reached into my purse and pulled out the recorder. The red light blinked steady. Every word had been captured. I played it back once, Lydia's threat echoing through the small bedroom. My stomach turned, but I pressed save and backed it up immediately to the cloud folder Daniel had set up for me. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a flicker of control return. Not safety, not yet. But evidence. Proof that her mask had slipped. That night, I sat at the desk writing notes of what to do next. Cameras, emails, patterns of calls. Daniel had told me the law did not move quickly, but it moved steadily if you had the right foundation. Outside the window, the street was quiet. No black SUV tonight, only the sound of cicadas rising from the trees. I closed the notebook and set the recorder beside it. Fear still pressed at the edges of my chest, but it was no longer the only thing there. Resolve had company now. I was not as alone as they wanted me to believe. And that made all the difference. The invitation came through a colleague at school who volunteered on the board of a children's literacy foundation. They were hosting a fundraising gala downtown at one of the old waterfront hotels. Normally, I would have declined, preferring the safety of home, but something in me stirred when I saw the date and the names of the sponsors. The guest list would be full of Charleston's business owners, philanthropists, even a few politicians. People Lydia and Ethan would want in their corner. I decided to go. Not as a shadow, not as the unwanted sister, but as myself. At a small boutique on King Street, I found a dress that clung to me like a declaration. Deep red silk that caught the light and turned it into fire. When I tried it on, the clerk smiled knowingly. I had not felt that kind of power in years, the quiet command of walking into a room and knowing eyes would follow. I paired it with simple heels and left my hair loose over my shoulders. The night of the gala, I walked through the revolving doors of the hotel, heart steady but loud in my ears. A photographer near the entrance lifted his camera almost on instinct. The flash startled me, then steadied me. Inside, chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light. The tables glittered with crystal and polished silver. I moved among the crowd, greeting acquaintances, answering questions about my work at the high school. It amazed me how easily people listened when you carried yourself as if you belonged. The dress helped, but it was more than fabric. It was the knowledge that I was not hiding anymore. Near the auction tables, a local business columnist asked if he could take my photo for the paper. I laughed lightly, agreed, and felt the shutter click again. Around me, conversations swirled, clinking glasses, laughter rising and falling. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to freedom. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. The paper ran a short piece about the event, and my picture had made it onto the society page. Social media picked it up, friends tagging me, comments flowing in. Red dress, bright smile framed by Charleston's elite. By noon, my phone buzzed with a call I knew would come. Lydia's name glared on the screen. I let it ring once, twice before I answered. Her voice hit me like a slap. What do you think you are doing? Do you think anyone wants you at events like that? Are you trying to ruin everything for me? I listened, calm, holding the phone away slightly so her shrillness did not pierce too deeply. She kept going, accusing me of drawing attention, of making her look small before the wedding. You think showing up in some ridiculous gown will scare me? You think you can turn people against me? Her anger fed me. I did not need to reply. The silence worked better than any words. She hated silence. I let a smile curve my lips, though she could not see it. Finally, she spat. You are not going to win, Emma. This is my world now. Then the line went dead. I set the phone on the table, the red dress draped across a chair nearby. She was rattled, that much was clear. Not because of what I had said, but because of what I had not. Presence spoke louder than explanation. That evening I walked to the waterfront, the paper folded under my arm. I sat on a bench watching the tide move against the pilings. My picture looked back at me from the page, calm, self-assured, exactly what I wanted Lydia to see. She thought she had erased me. Now the city itself had witnessed otherwise. The wind off the harbor was cool, carrying the salt smell of the water. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into my bag. A gull cried overhead. My pulse slowed to something steady, almost serene. For once, I did not feel like the forgotten daughter or the discarded sister. I felt visible. And visibility was power Lydia had never expected me to take for myself. The decision came to me while scrolling through flight options late one night, the glow of my laptop filling the quiet of my bedroom. Charleston had grown too small, too watchful. Eyes followed me now, whispers trailed behind. If Lydia and Ethan thought I was plotting, I would give them something glittering and harmless to look at. I booked tickets to Santorini with Marissa, a friend from college who thrived on spontaneity. She squealed when I asked if she wanted to come, already planning outfits and hashtags before I even closed the confirmation screen. I packed light but deliberate silk dresses, wide-brimmed hats, the kind of wardrobe that photographed well against whitewashed walls and endless sea. The island was everything I imagined, sunlight pouring over cliffs, blue domes rising like painted strokes against the sky. Marissa and I sipped cold wine on terraces, toes sandy from walking narrow paths that twisted down toward the Aegean. I let her snap photos of me against the backdrop, glass in hand, hair tossed by the salt wind. That evening I posted a carousel of them. Red dress, white dress, sea and sky stretching forever. The comments poured in. Must be nice. Living the dream. Nothing to worry about except tan lines. What they did not see was what I carried in the bottom of my leather tote, wrapped in a folder thick with dates, signatures, and evidence. Bank statements, forged applications, copies of checks. Proof that Lydia and Ethan had built their foundation on lies written in my name. While Marissa napped in the villa, I walked to a quiet cafe overlooking the caldera. The Wi-Fi flickered strong enough to send the files to a secure inbox at a financial crimes office stateside. I typed carefully, checked every attachment twice, then pressed send. The screen confirmed transmission. A chill passed over me, even though the sun was hot on my shoulders. I sat there for a long while, fingers tracing the rim of my glass of water. It felt both enormous and invisible that moment. On the surface, I was another tourist in Santorini. Beneath it, I had just set a fire across the ocean. Marissa woke refreshed and insisted on dinner by the water. I smiled, dressed, let her chatter fill the evening. She thought I was simply unwinding, healing from family drama by traveling somewhere beautiful. I let her believe it. It was safer that way. Back in Charleston, the whispers reached them. I knew because Lydia's posts grew frantic, curated smiles layered over eyes that looked strained. Ethan stayed absent from pictures altogether. A colleague of mine texted late one night saying she overheard someone at the gym mention my name, followed by words like fraud and investigation. The rumor mill spun faster than I could have hoped. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. His voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Emma, if you think you can ruin us, you are mistaken. Do not push this. You do not understand what you are getting into." I saved the voicemail, sent a copy to Daniel with a simple note, another piece for the file. Meanwhile, I posted a photo of my breakfast by the sea. Honey drizzled over thick yogurt, coffee in a white porcelain cup, the Aegean behind it. To anyone scrolling, it looked like I was too far away and too carefree to plot anything. Reports filtered back to me through friends still tangled in Charleston's social web. Ethan had been seen at a bar, furious, snapping at someone on the phone. Lydia's voice carried through a closed door at their townhouse, shouting about how careless he had been, how she should have handled everything herself. The cracks widened. They had spent months painting me as fragile, irrelevant, easily erased. Now they were tearing each other apart, not because I had spoken a single word publicly, but because the silence left them guessing. On the final evening in Santorini, Marissa and I climbed the steep path to watch the sunset in Oya. The crowd hushed as the sky bled orange and pink, the sun slipping behind the horizon. Marissa sighed, snapping photo after photo. I leaned against the wall, phone buzzing in my hand. A message from Daniel. Got confirmation. They know something is coming. Stay quiet. Timing is on our side. I locked the screen, slid the phone into my bag, and let the last of the light wash over me. Around me, strangers clapped softly as the sun disappeared, as if applauding the close of another day. I smiled, not for the sunset, but for the storm already building an ocean away. The newspapers in Charleston were filled with glossy spreads about the upcoming Whitford wedding. Socialites and columnists wrote with giddy excitement about the guest list, the imported orchids, the 10-tier cake flown in from New York, and the designer gown Lydia would wear. Every photograph showed polished smiles and perfect angles, the kind of staged happiness that sold papers and reassured investors. None of those readers knew that behind the manicured hedges of the Whitford estate, an envelope had arrived that morning carrying a secret sharp enough to draw blood. Victoria Whitford held it in her hand at the breakfast table. She had been expecting thank you notes from charities, perhaps a letter from one of her society friends, but instead the heavy cream paper carried no return address. She frowned at the unfamiliar handwriting, slid it open with the silver knife beside her plate, and drew out the contents. What she saw drained the warmth from her coffee. Copies of loan applications, pages of forged signatures, my name printed again and again, debts that ran not in thousands but in hundreds of thousands. Each sheet bore the mark of legitimacy, bank seals, witness notations, dates, and lines of approval. If Victoria had learned anything in her years of boardrooms and balance sheets, it was the difference between rumor and evidence. This was evidence. Her fork rested untouched beside her plate of eggs as she read every line. The papers alleged that Emma Reed, a schoolteacher of modest means, had taken on debts large enough to ruin her for life. Yet Victoria had met me once in passing at a charity gala and remembered a reserved young woman in a modest dress, not a gambler chasing hundreds of thousands. Something did not fit. She folded the papers, neatly pressed them flat with her palm, and sent for Ethan. He came into the library late that morning, still in his workout clothes, his confidence intact. The carved shelves towered behind him, lined with leather volumes that no one had opened in years. Victoria sat at the great desk with the envelope before her. "Mother, you called for me," he said lightly, wiping sweat from his brow. She slid the papers across the desk. "Look at these." He glanced down and the smile faltered. The pages rustled as he shuffled through them too quickly, avoiding her eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "That is not important," she replied. "What is important is whether it is true." He leaned back in the chair opposite, affecting nonchalance, but his fingers tapped restlessly on the armrest. "This is nothing but a setup. Someone is trying to stir trouble before the wedding." Victoria did not blink. "The name on these loans is Emma Reed. She is your fiancé's sister, is she not?" Before he could answer, Lydia swept into the room without knocking, her perfume arriving a second before she did. She picked up one of the sheets and skimmed it with an airy laugh. "Oh, this again. I should have guessed. Emma must be behind this. She has always had a flair for drama. She is jealous and bitter because she was not invited. Do not let her nonsense rattle you." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe Emma fabricated entire loan files with bank seals and notarized signatures?" Lydia's laugh faltered, and for a moment the silence grew heavy. Then she tossed the paper back on the desk. "Technology makes forgery easy these days. People fake documents all the time. Emma is desperate enough to try anything." Ethan found his voice again. "She is right, Mother. Emma has been unstable for years. She would rather burn everything down than watch her sister succeed." Victoria studied them both. Her instincts honed from decades of reading men across conference tables and sensing weakness in business partners told her something else entirely. There was a stiffness in Ethan's jaw, a too casual deflection in Lydia's tone. She tapped the papers once more. If there is truth here, I will not allow this marriage to go forward. The air thickened. Lydia's painted smile tightened. Ethan straightened in his chair, his charm slipping like a poorly tied mask. Mother, this is ridiculous. We have investors, press, politicians attending. Canceling would be catastrophic. Victoria's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that never reached her eyes. Catastrophe is marrying into a scandal and finding my family name printed on the front page beside the word fraud. The library door closed behind them when they left, but Victoria stayed seated staring at the envelope once more. Her mind ticked through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Upstairs, preparations for the wedding continued. Florists marched in with armfuls of white roses. A seamstress arrived to fit Lydia's gown. Caterers confirmed menus over the phone. From the outside, the Whitford estate gleamed with celebration. Inside, cracks spread quietly through the foundation. By afternoon, Lydia was pacing in her sweet heels, clicking against marble. Ethan leaned against the window frame, arms folded, eyes dark. What if she believes it? Lydia hissed. What if she calls off the wedding? He rubbed his temple. Then we make sure she does not. She hates Emma, does she not? We play into that. We remind her Emma is desperate and spiteful. But the way she looked at us, Lydia whispered. She knows something. Across town, I sat in a quiet cafe, stirring honey into my tea, imagining the scene. I had never been inside the Whitford Library, but I could picture the grand scale, the hush, the way Victoria's voice would slice through the air. I imagined Ethan's face tightening, Lydia's laugh faltering. I could almost hear it. The papers had done their work. They had reached the one person who could bring the wedding to its knees. As evening settled over Charleston, the Whitford estate glittered with lights. Cars pulled through the gates, delivering planners and suppliers. Photographers camped outside for a glimpse of the bride-to-be. Inside, Victoria sat alone in her study, rereading the envelope's contents by lamplight. Her husband had long trusted her judgment, and tonight that judgment whispered, caution, louder than champagne glasses could drown out. She lifted the phone, but set it back down, indecision tightening her chest. For all her power, she knew what it meant to drag family shame into daylight. But she also knew the price of silence. The grand wedding loomed only days away. Dresses were pressed, speeches written, the orchestra rehearsed. Yet Victoria Whitford, who had never allowed doubt to rule her life, carried doubt now like a stone in her throat. And Ethan, though he tried to smile at the dinner table that night, knew his mother's warning still hung over him like a blade. The storm had broken through their walls. And thousands of miles away, could almost taste the ruin in the air. The flight back from Greece landed in the pale dawn of Atlanta, and by the time I drove into Charleston, the streets were already alive with the hum of wedding preparations. I had barely stepped into my apartment when Daniel called, his voice low and clipped, telling me to meet him at his office right away. The blinds were drawn when I arrived, the room lit by the glow of his desk lamp. On the table lay a neat stack of folders, a small hard drive, and my phone with the newest recordings stored inside. He looked up at me with steady eyes. This is enough, Emma. It is time. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. I had lived with fear in the pit of my stomach for weeks, but handing everything over meant stepping across a line I could never return from. We packed the evidence into 2 briefcases. Every forged loan document, every bank printout, copies of the photos I had taken of signatures that did not match the audio clips of Lydia's threats, the video stills from the small camera tucked into the hallway vent. Daniel checked everything twice, then slipped his jacket over his shoulders. You drive, he said quietly. If anyone is watching, they will expect me to lead. The streets blurred past as I followed his directions. My palms dampened against the steering wheel, every traffic light stretching into eternity. We pulled into the underground lot of a nondescript government building. Daniel carried one of the cases, I carried the other. We walked in silence until the elevator doors closed us in. On the third floor, two detectives waited. Their badges glinted under the fluorescent lights. Detective Harris was a tall man with graying hair, his tone direct. Detective Monroe, younger, carried a legal pad already half filled with notes. We laid the briefcases on the table in their conference room. Daniel began to explain, methodical and precise, but they stopped him after a few minutes. "We will review everything ourselves," Harris said. "What we need from you is simple. Did you sign any of these loans?" "No," I answered, my voice firm, though my hands trembled beneath the table. "Were you aware of anyone attempting to use your identity before this year?" Monroe asked. "Only recently," I said. "The phone numbers, the documents, the signatures, they all point to my sister, Lydia, and her fiancé, Ethan." There was no satisfaction in saying it out loud. Only a hollow ache that family could twist blood ties into weapons. Harris opened one folder, scanning the forged signatures. "These are good. Not perfect, but good enough to slide past most bank clerks. Whoever did this knew the system." Daniel leaned forward. "Which is why it is critical the investigation stays sealed until you are ready to move. If they suspect even for a moment, she could end up facing retaliation again." My stomach tightened. The memory of my cut break lines flashed across my mind. Harris met my eyes. "We understand. This will remain confidential. But know this. When we act, we will not miss." They signed the chain of custody forms securing the evidence. Harris clicked the briefcase shut with finality. It felt as though part of the weight slid off my shoulders, though another kind of heaviness settled in its place. As we walked back to the car, Daniel placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You did the hardest part. Now you let them do theirs." "But what if Lydia finds out?" I asked. "She will know it was me." "She already suspects," he said gently. "But suspicion and proof are two very different things. For now, you live your life as if nothing has changed." The next few days blurred into a tense rhythm. At school, I smiled at my students' handed out assignments and pretended my mind was not counting down to something unseen. At home, I left the blinds closed, scanning the street each night for parked cars that lingered too long. One evening, as I locked the classroom, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I answered, heart pounding. A voice whispered through the line, low and distorted. "Stop digging. You think you are safe, but you are not." The call ended before I could respond. I stood frozen in the hallway, the sound echoing in my ears. Later, when I told Daniel, he simply nodded. "That is why we moved when we did. The walls are already closing in on them. Empty threats are all they have left until the hammer falls." Even with his reassurance, sleep came only in fragments. Every creak of the building made me sit upright. Every shadow outside my window felt like a warning. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else. A steady pulse of certainty. The decision had been made, the truth secured in the hands of people who could wield it. By the end of the week, Harris called Daniel. We met them again in the same building, the same conference room. Monroe slid a notepad across the table, filled now with cross-reference details. "We have already traced the funds," he explained. "They were funneled through shell accounts before landing in Ethan Whitford's holdings. Your sister co-signed at least one transfer using your name. It is not just fraud. It is conspiracy." The word rang in my chest, heavy and irreversible. Harris folded his hands. "We will move soon, but timing is everything. The goal is not only charges, but maximum impact. This wedding has drawn press, investors, half the Charleston elite. When the truth breaks, it will break loudly." Daniel asked what I could not. "So, when will you act?" Harris's expression did not shift. "At the moment they least expect. Until then, silence." The walk back to my car felt like moving through water. I gripped the steering wheel when we pulled onto the street, staring straight ahead. "It is out of your hands now," Daniel said softly. "That is the hardest part, but also the safest." I drove home in silence, the city glowing with preparations for Lydia's grand day. Rented tents rose in manicured gardens. Florists filled trucks with orchids. Bakers stacked sugar flowers onto towering cakes. Society pages buzzed about gowns and guest lists. And beneath all of it, sealed in folders inside a police evidence room, the truth waited like a live wire ready to snap the moment someone touched it. I closed my blinds that night, set my phone on the nightstand, and sat in the dark. Fear still twisted inside me, but it no longer ruled me. I had passed the point of no return, and in that quiet, I let myself breathe. Somewhere in the city, Lydia and Ethan still toasted their future. They had no idea the floor had already been cut from beneath them, and I would be ready for the silence to break. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and heavy with Charleston humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made the air shimmer. I sat by my window with the blinds half drawn, the city already stirring with church bells and traffic. Somewhere across town, Lydia was stepping into lace and silk, her makeup team fussing over every detail, her voice sharp with demands. I dressed simply, a navy dress and a cardigan, nothing that would catch attention. My presence was not requested, nor would it have been tolerated. But I did not need to be there. My part had already been played. Now it was time to watch the consequences unfold. From my small apartment, I could almost hear the chatter of guests arriving at St. Michael's, one of the oldest churches in the city, its white steeple piercing the sky. The society pages had been buzzing for weeks about the guest list, the floral arches, the imported champagne. My parents, I knew, were seated in the second row, faces lifted with pride, ready to watch their golden daughter marry into the Whitford fortune. I poured myself coffee, the steam curling in the still air, and turned on the muted feed of a local journalist's social media page. Reporters had gathered outside the church, snapping photos of designer dresses and whispered arrivals. Each update carried me closer to what I knew was coming. Inside the church, Lydia would be radiant. I could imagine the hush as she walked down the aisle in her pearl-encrusted gown, her veil trailing like a river of light. Ethan waiting at the altar with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. I pictured the priest lifting his voice, the familiar cadence filling the vaulted ceiling. And then the pause. The question that has echoed through centuries of ceremonies. Does anyone here present have just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony? I leaned forward, my hands wrapped tight around my mug. The silence stretched thick and expectant. The doors opened. According to the updates, uniformed officers stepped into the aisle, their presence slicing through the golden glow of candlelight. Murmurs rippled through the pews, dresses rustling, programs clutched tighter. The priest faltered, lowering his book, as Detective Harris produced a folded document and read aloud. Lydia Whitmore, you are under arrest for multiple counts of bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The words rang like thunder in the hushed sanctuary. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then gasps rose, chairs scraped, whispers surged into chaos. I imagined Lydia's painted lips parting, her bouquet tumbling to the floor as her knees buckled beneath the weight of reality. Her perfect day, the day she had built to crown herself untouchable, collapsing in an instant. My phone buzzed again with updates. Guests were describing the scene in real time. Some filmed discreetly, others covered their mouths in disbelief. The Whitfords sat stiffly, their matriarch Victoria staring at Ethan, eyes narrowing, as though every warning she had once dismissed had come to roost. And Ethan. He had always been charming, quick, with a joke perfectly polished. But the messages were clear. He stepped back from Lydia the moment the handcuffs gleamed. His voice cut through the din, sharp and cold. I cannot do this. I will not marry a criminal. My chest tightened as I read, even though I had expected it. He turned to his parents' words, echoing down the aisle, refusing to bind himself to scandal. Lydia reached for him, frantic, pleading. He pulled away, retreating behind his father's shoulder, his face pale but resolute. The crowd swelled with noise. Some whispered Lydia's name with pity, others with satisfaction. Phones lit up as the news spread beyond those stained glass windows. My own rang with alert after alert as local outlets pushed the story. The Whitmore name, once polished and envied, now dragged through the public square. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart thud with something fierce and complicated. Relief, yes. Vindication, certainly. But also sorrow, because she was still my sister. Watching her unravel before hundreds of eyes, before cameras, before the entire city, was a cruelty she had built for herself, but cruelty all the same. The updates painted the rest of the picture. My mother frozen, her lipstick smudged as she clutched my father's arm. My father staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Lydia crying out, her voice breaking as she begged for understanding, for time, for mercy. The officers guiding her firmly toward the doors, her veil dragging across the stone aisle. Outside, the flashes of cameras erupted. The same reporters who had angled for shots of gowns now captured the image of a bride in cuffs. The once invited elite recoiled, their jewels catching the harsh sun, their whispers laced with judgment. Inside my apartment, I closed my eyes and breathed. The silence I had been waiting for was gone, shattered by the noise of justice crashing down. Yet beneath the storm, a steadier truth settled in me. This was not about spectacle or humiliation. It was about survival. Lydia had tried to erase me, to bury me under debts and lies. Instead, she had buried herself. The city buzzed as I sat in my chair, my phone still vibrating with fragments of chaos. I did not answer the calls that came from familiar numbers. I let them ring one after another until the sound became nothing more than background noise. In that moment, I knew there was no going back to who I had been before. The forgotten sister, the overlooked daughter, the quiet shadow. She was gone. The church bells tolled in the distance, not for a union, but for the ruin of one. And I sat alone, steady, waiting for whatever would come next. I left my coffee cup on the table and finally stood, my legs stiff from sitting so long. The news had already spread across Charleston faster than the bells could echo. I could hear neighbors out on the street, their voices carrying pieces of the same story. The Whitmores, once the name, whispered with envy, now spoken like a warning. That evening, the television stations replayed the footage. Lydia in her gown, eyes wide, wrists bound. Ethan stepping back, his face twisting as though he had seen a ghost rather than the woman he promised to marry. My parents standing stiffly, their pride cracking into ash under the heat of the cameras. It was all there, recorded from a dozen angles, impossible to deny or rewrite. The investigations unfolded quickly once the arrests were made. The files Daniel and I had given the authorities had already painted the picture. Fraudulent accounts. Forged signatures. Loans that never should have been approved. Payments shuffled from one shell company to another until the paper trail circled back to Lydia and Ethan. With the wedding spectacle, the evidence became more than paperwork. It became undeniable. The Whitfords released a statement 2 days later. Short, cold, without flourish. They were severing all business and personal ties with the Whitmores. Ethan's engagement was declared void and their family's name would not be connected to scandal. Their lawyers moved swiftly, pulling contracts, freezing shared ventures, reclaiming what could be salvaged. Lydia's dream of marrying into wealth and permanence had shattered with one announcement. My parents did not call me. I heard from a neighbor that my mother had fainted when the mail brought headlines from the Post and Courier, each one printed with Lydia's mugshot. My father was seen in the yard trimming hedges furiously while neighbors slowed their cars to stare. Pride had been their shield for decades, but no hedge, no perfect house, no polite smile could protect them now. I walked past their house once in the days after quiet as the cicadas hummed in the trees. Curtains twitched. I kept walking, my shoes steady on the pavement, and for the first time in my life, I felt no need to knock on that door or beg to be seen. The weeks stretched, and with them, Lydia's world collapsed. Court dates were set, hearings held, and her name filled the docket. Ethan avoided her entirely, retreating to Atlanta, his lawyers insisting he had been misled, that he had signed papers without understanding. But witnesses came forward, whispers of arguments and late-night meetings. He could not wash his hands clean, not completely. For Lydia, there was no escape. She lost her fiancé, her access to the Whitford fortune, her carefully constructed image. What remained was a record, a set of charges, and the heavy silence of the same society she had once courted. Friends stopped answering her calls. Invitations disappeared. Every glossy smile that had once leaned toward her now turned away. Justice is not always a loud triumph. Often it is quiet, measured, and slow. Yet I felt it in each headline, each step of the process, each time I walked freely through the streets of Charleston without ducking my head. I had no need to raise my voice. The truth had spoken for me. The night before her sentencing, I stood at the waterfront. The air was thick with salt and possibility, the water dark but steady. I thought of us as children running through the marsh grass, Lydia always ahead, always demanding the spotlight. I thought of my parents clapping for her, their eyes never straying to me. And I thought of how all of it had led here to this moment when silence and patience had been my only weapons, and they had been enough. I did not go to the courtroom. I did not need to. The outcome was inevitable. Fraud and forgery carried weight no charm could soften. Lydia's sentence was printed in the papers by noon. Years to serve, fines to pay, reputation gone. I closed the article and set the phone aside. There was nothing more to watch, nothing more to wait for. My life for the first time in years was not defined by what she had done to me or what my parents had denied me. It was mine to shape, and I felt the weight of that freedom settle like a mantle I had earned. When I walked away from the church that day, I had not looked back, and I would not now. The story was over. Lydia had lost her marriage, her freedom, and the image she had prized above all else. My parents were left to face their neighbors and their own choices, and I was left with something rarer than revenge. I had my dignity back. I looked straight ahead, calm and steady, and spoke the words that had carried me through it all. Justice sometimes comes late, but it never fails to arrive. If you have ever been pushed aside or silenced, remember this: the truth will speak. Share your thoughts below and stay with me for the stories still to come.